The Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall is an enormous RPG and an impressive video game landmark for its time. It has one of the biggest worlds in gaming, endless quests, many role-playing possibilities, and a great sandbox for modding. Yet, Daggerfall is not without its faults and jank. What are they? Well, let's find out. I feel like this video has been a long time coming. Another one of the great classic RPGs to add to this channel's repertoire. Yet, it was a little daunting to even start Daggerfall both because of its sheer size and because of how unwelcoming the more archaic RPGs can be. I still have been very curious about Daggerfall because it always looked like my kinda game. In this video, I'll share my experience with the game, what I loved about it, and what jank I encountered. First, I think it's important to set the expectations. I'm not an expert on the Elder Scrolls lore, as the only game in the series I played properly was Skyrim. And even then I couldn't really be bothered with reading lore books in it and such. It is still one of my main points of comparison as an indicator of the series' evolution. My other points of comparison are Daggerfall's contemporaries, similar RPGs of the same era, like the Might and Magic or Wizardry games. Did you know that the Elder Scrolls was initially planned as a blobber, meaning a first-person party-based RPG, just like Might and Magic or Wizardry? I found some promotional The Elder Scrolls Arena material in a magazine, and it has early screenshots that showcase UI with multiple player characters. That would have been rad as heck and would have helped me scratch that Might and Magic itch even better, but it would be a totally different game and it could have gotten a bit too out of hand with how complex the character building is in this game. In Daggerfall, I mean. This would make more sense to point out while covering the Elder Scrolls Arena, but that game looks like it might be a bit too archaic even for me. Speaking of archaic, I'm not playing the original release of Daggerfall, because we've been blessed with a Unity remake, which greatly enhances the compatibility with modern systems, runs the game in larger resolutions, and also allows modding, and was a Bethesda RPG without mods. I went with only very minimal quality of life improvements though, because I wanted as vanilla-like experience as possible. I've got convenient quest log, which makes the quest log slightly more understandable, dynamic skies, which replaces the skyboxes. I didn't mind the original ones, but they would pan at a different speed than the camera and make me dizzy. Convenient clock, which helps with the time-sensitive elements of the game, and world tooltips, which just shows tooltips with names of objects I'm looking at. Anyway, let's start the game. We get a pre-rendered intro with a lore dump. Boring. D. Wait, there's also FMV stuff. I love that. Basically, the Emperor sent a horned letter to the Queen of Daggerfall, but then the post-nut clarity hit and he wants that letter back. On it. I was on a boat to Daggerfall, but somehow ended up in the tutorial dungeon after a shipwreck. I quit my basic gear, and then just learning to swing my axe was a bit of a challenge. A simple click won't do it. Turns out the game has directional swings akin to something like Mountain Blade, where you have to hold the mouse button and then drag the mouse to swing in that direction. Different direction swings have different damage and hit chance. How different? Who knows? I can really appreciate a more inventive approach to melee combat, but I had that turned off, because I wasn't a fan of how swinging would lock up my camera. The first dungeon is already huge and pretty maze-like, but look at the map! It's a fully 3D render of the dungeon. That's amazing! It's very helpful with all the verticality. It would be hell in 2D. I've seen similar maps in some modern shooters, but they would not look as good and detailed. I don't really get the healing spells or potions, but I can just rest to heal. That's a very classic old school RPG move. As long as there are no enemies around, you can heal pretty much infinitely, just with a slight chance that something might attack you in your sleep. After leaving the dungeon, I'm free to go pretty much anywhere, and that's when the scope of the world hits. You see this map? This is just a single city. It's already huge. It's bigger than the entire GTA Vice City map, and it is just a single dot on this region map. Every single dot on it is a point of interest, and then there's 20 or so regions like that. Yeah, there's no way I can explore all of that, but it's very impressive. The settlements vary in sizes from small villages or just lone taverns along the road to sprawling cities filled with pubs, guilds, shops, and temples to various deities. I found it cool how there's different biomes with different architecture styles, or how the seasons would actually change over time, gracing the familiar surroundings with some snow every now and then. The wilderness is filled with dungeons and fortresses to explore and slay enemies in, and if the tutorial dungeon already seemed large, it was just a teaser of things to come. Dungeons in Daggerfall are enormous and pretty easy to get lost in, but if you're here for some good old-fashioned dungeon crawling, you'll feel right at home. There are quite a few role-playing possibilities when it comes to both character building and activities. I couldn't even tell you everything because as a newbie I just followed some advice online and picked the pre-made ranger class, which was a decent melee fighter with some survival skills. I started out looking for random tasks from people at taverns, but I ended up joining the Fighters Guild and doing a lot of stuff for them in exchange for gold and training. I also joined the Knights of Dragon, since the title seemed fitting for an Argonian. And while the Knights Order didn't reward quests with gold, they would give armor pieces when increasing rank, and renting rooms in taverns all around became free of charge due to the Knights' reputation. I had joined some religious order, but I forgot which one, and different towns would have different temples, so I didn't do much for them. There are still thieves and mages guilds that I didn't do much with, but the temples were still useful for curing diseases, and the mages guild for buying spells and identifying magic items. But before I get too ahead of myself, let's stop and turn back to the character creation for a moment. I mostly skipped it during my playthrough, because there's this thing with these old RPGs where some skills would be way more useful than others, and there's no way of knowing which ones are which without playing, creating a terrible character, and then having to reroll with some better knowledge. On top of that, Daggerfall has one of the most in-depth character creators I've seen. My pre-made class turned out mostly fine, but if I were to create a new character now, I'd optimize quite a few things. Let's say I'm making a mostly fighter class again. I first get to choose a race, and I do that by selecting a region I'm from. Originally I picked an Argonian just because I love how they look, but they have probably the worst racial bonus, which is decreased stamina loss when swimming. If you're carrying some heavier items, you're sinking to the bottom regardless. This time I picked a Dark Elf. They still look pretty cool and evil, but the racial bonus is also pretty great. It increases damage and chance to hit. Then I get to choose my skills. This is the most important bit. You want to select the skills you'll be using the most as your primary skills, because that's how you level up in this game. There is no typical experience bar. Instead, you have to increase your primary and major skills to increase your level. So for my fighter character, I selected Long Blade, Running and Critical Strike. Long Blade and Critical Strike are increased by just smacking enemies, and Running is pretty self-explanatory, and that will be done a lot. That's probably the easiest skill to level. For major skills, I picked Dodging for survivability, as well as Restoration Magic, and Blunt Weapons, because skeletons have resistance to blades. Minor skills are whatever utilities I thought I could use: jumping, climbing, archery, etiquette, and so on. The skills that I found pretty much useless are the language skills. They give you a low chance to pacify specific enemies, but you'll likely want to kill them anyway. I focused on strength, intellect, and speed as far as stats go. Then the advantages and disadvantages section is where this character creation goes really unique. They make the character a lot more specialized, and you can create some really interesting or even broken builds with this. It gives you the chance to make something overpowered or handicap yourself for some masochistic challenge runs. The catch is that the more advantages you have, the slower you level up, and vice versa. So you usually want to balance out your advantages and disadvantages. For disadvantages, I selected some forbidden item types that I wouldn't use anyway, like axes and bucklers, so it barely matters. I also got a critical weakness to paralysis. Paralysis is a big pain in the butt in this game, and it makes spiders and such very dangerous. But as soon as you get to the first town, you can just visit the Mages Guild and buy a free action spell, which is pretty much Cure Paralysis, but better. And it's very cheap to cast, so paralysis stops being a problem. For advantages, I picked resistance to magic, because some late game enemies get very annoying with it. But more importantly, magic mastery times 2, meaning I get twice as many spell points as I have intellect. Times 3 might be even better. I believe the non-spellcaster pre-made classes have magic mastery at 0.5, so they're unable to cast pretty much anything throughout the whole game. And believe me, you want at least some utility spells like recall, even as a dumb fighter. And lastly, you can select how much HP you get per level, which also impacts leveling difficulty. Alternatively, you can also fill out a questionnaire to get a class picked for you, and just look how fancy those scrolling scrolls are. They do indeed scroll. It's not that useful or impressive these days, but I guess back in the day that was an interesting feature. You know what feature I missed a lot in this character creation though? Tooltips. There are no tooltips for any of the stats or skills. I had no clue what most of them do at first, so it made the character building even more confusing. Hell, at first I thought per was short for perception, not personality. Anyway, we've got our character, now on to the adventuring. The first dungeon is all well and good, but after it things can get a bit overwhelming with how sandboxy this game is. The main quest is not that obvious at first, and it only really starts as you level up and start receiving letters. So in the meanwhile, the course of action is to go to the nearest city and get some random quests and try to get stronger. By the way, you'll probably want to save in separate save slots often, and save before picking up any quests, because they have time limits. That might sound alarming, but it does add to the immersion, and the time limits are fairly generous. Yet you'll still want to be sure you can do a quest right after picking it up, and get straight to it. Ooh, who's an ugly kitty? You are. There are various locations to get quests. Like I told before, you could try visiting taverns for some various errands. In my experience, night orders are nice if you want to go to dungeons, while Fighters Guild is a more sure way to make money, and it has more quests that take place above ground. You'll probably want to join multiple factions and alternate doing quests between them, because you can only rank up to get better rewards every set amount of time. Oh my god, there are pixel titties in this! I'm not sure if I can show this on YouTube. Aside from the free action spell, some of the first things you'll want to buy when you make the money are a cart and a horse. Carry weight is pretty realistic in Daggerfall. You can't haul all that much at once, so you quickly become an adventure hobo lugging a cart full of junk around. Actually, money also has weight in this game, so my cart usually was filled mostly with pure gold coins. A horse is a bit more self-explanatory. It allows you to move faster, and it really helps considering how large every location in the game is. I love how the horse is just a camera overlay. Do you prefer the up horse or the down horse? I have an interesting relationship with combat in Daggerfall. I think there are some things it does in really cool ways, but at the same time it's quite janky. I already mentioned the directional swinging, and that's a really cool feature, but at the same time I found it quite annoying and just turned it off. Still, I found the combat surprisingly responsive. Combat is one of the main things that prevent me from getting into Morrowind, with the way I would keep missing basic melee attacks. That can happen in Daggerfall, but it doesn't feel nearly as bad, and I would rarely feel like the combat is based on dice rolls rather than skill. There is this janky thing where you can sprint in and out of enemies' melee range while fighting them and avoid a lot of damage that way. It's a peculiar kind of dance that feels rewarding and makes taking hits feel like genuine mistakes on the player's part, yet at the same time it's like borderline breaking the game. Or it is interesting how it's problematic to switch weapons on the go. Every time you equip a weapon, there's a delay until you can actually use it. It's a way to emulate the character just shuffling through their bags and switching gear, which is generally immersive, but it does hurt some playstyles at the same time. For example, I would have loved to do more archery, but most of the fights are in close quarters, and switching to melee weapons would just take too long for things to be practical. So the only times I would use bows would be when I could shoot the enemies like sitting ducks, in places they can't reach me from. Another thing that seems neat is the fact that there are a lot of different weapon types and corresponding skills. So you have a chance to roleplay and pick your favorite weapons, but then the different weapon types don't really do anything different, so it's kind of pointless. I started out with an axe, but I ended up using long blades because they just have best damage stats. There are quite a few cool things for immersion in Daggerfall. To name a few, I really like how you can just bash doors open if they're locked instead of being forced to pick locks. Truth be told, I don't even know how to pick locks in this game. My axe always did the job.
Here's Johnny!
Or in an old school RPG fashion, the map markers are very minimal, so you can actually ask random people in town for directions, insights on various things, or even work. It does make it feel quite a bit like being lost in an unfamiliar town in real life. One of the main things that drew me to play Daggerfall was actually the inventory system. I was a huge fan of the pre-rendered paper dolls in Might and Magic 6 to 8. It was great equipping different armor pieces and seeing my characters update, and Daggerfall takes it a step further, because it has an insane amount of clothing slots. You can equip various kinds of regular clothing, and then have them as padding for armor that goes on top. Aside from all the boots, trousers, tops and helmets being separate, you can have different armor on each arm, and even a cloak on top of everything. And that's not even counting the non-cosmetic accessory slots. I love to see this kind of customization in games. I guess this is as good a time as any to talk about Daggerfall's presentation. I like how the game looks. It uses charming pixel art and plenty of two-dimensional billboard sprites. You know that pixel art AI game mockup that's been making its rounds on Twitter? Screw that shit. Daggerfall has been doing these kind of graphics before a lot of us were even born. And this stuff here is hand-drawn, pixel by pixel. It's not quite the same fidelity as the pre-rendered sprites in Might and Magic games, but it's still a very distinctive and recognizable look, if a little generic stylistically. There are texture upscaling mods for Daggerfall, but I feel like the original pixel art sprites still look just fine and did not want to change them out. I really have a soft spot for billboard sprites in games. The one complaint I'd have when it comes to visuals is just the variety. I really wish dungeons had more varied tile sets, because after a couple of dungeon delves it really gets repetitive. I couldn't really tell most of the dungeons in the game apart from the looks at all. I'd be dead if I had to do that at gunpoint. The sound effects are fittingly crusty in the game. There's not much I can say about them, but the music? Oh man. It's pretty simple MIDI tunes, but they're actually great. The dungeon themes are straight up some ambient, deep dark dungeon synth jams. They're a bit less memorable in the grand scheme, but they're very fitting and not intrusive. But then there are the town and indoors themes, and those are absolutely worthy of the royal halls. So I keep praising the game, but there's gotta be some caveat, right? Oh yeah. Daggerfall is too big for its own good. It's so big, it ate itself. Culprit number 1 is procedural generation. There's no way a world this large could have been handcrafted. So the map I showed you? Yeah, it's big, but it's mostly empty. Imagine driving from town to town in real life. There's just fields of nothing on, and it's the same in Daggerfall. In a way that's realistic, but that means you can walk for hours and find nothing. When you do get to a city, it appears larger than it actually is. There are several buildings of interest, but most of the buildings are random civilian houses. It's pretty immersive that there are regular people living in towns, and it's cool how you can enter every single building, but there's nothing in them, so what's the point? You can get quests that lead you to specific residences, and it's a whole spiel trying to find the correct one. It's like a needle in a haystack. You have to ask random people for directions, but the most common response is, "I wouldn't tell you if I knew, you filthy insert race." Yeah. And when you eventually get the house marked on the map and do the required objective, it goes back to being a generic nameless house, so discovering who lives where is not permanent. I guess that lends itself to infinite procedural generation, but it's kinda lame. I had a case where I had to find a missing person, but the person he was last seen with got generated with the same exact name, so it would sound like the person was last seen with himself. When asking people for info, however, I had 2 entries with the same exact name, and I couldn't know which one of them is the missing one, so the procedural generation can be quite broken. It can be the same with dungeons. I love dungeons, but they're nonsensical mazes in this game. Most quests require you to kill a specific enemy or find a specific item in the dungeon, but with how large and labyrinthian they are, it can take a real long time. On top of it, there are hidden doors and switches, easy to miss things like that, and when you finally complete the objective, good luck navigating back. That's where the recall spell might come useful, if you can cast it. I couldn't with my low mana ranger. I even had the quest objective spawn in places that were straight up not only hidden, but inaccessible. This is where the Unity version comes in handy. It has console commands, meaning cheats. The most useful ones are the ones that teleport the player to the quest objective, and then back to the exit. The first half of my Daggerfall playthrough was like a honeymoon period. I was at A with the game's scope and all of its interesting systems, but as time went I started seeing through the veil and realized how repetitive and meaningless most of the content is. The further I went, the more I used cheats, because doing the same randomly generated errands over and over again just stopped being fun. At least the main quest locations are static and same in every playthrough, but even those would only have 1 or 2 more unique looking rooms, and the rest would be the usual labyrinth spaghetti. And you know what's absolutely soul crushing? Dungeons that require you to find a person to talk to, because you can't just teleport to them. There is this one main quest dungeon that required me to talk to this lady on at least 3 different occasions, and I would struggle to find the path to her even with a walkthrough. On top of that, the dungeon would be filled with enemies that nearly instantly drain all of my stamina and make me pass out, so the whole thing was nightmarish. Overall, the majority of quests in the game would be very basic. Either be an errand boy and deliver an item to person X, or go to place Y and kill Z creature. The repetitive content would not even be that bad if everything didn't look so goddamn same. There's no way I can tell any of the locations apart. Even the people in towns are all the same generic humans. You don't even see any of the elves, Khajiit or Argonians. What's up with that? I would just do the main quest and be done with the game at this point, but it's not that simple. The requirements to even get the main quest can be very obscure and confusing. Definitely find some guide for that. When I finally started getting into the main quest, I found that the enemies in story dungeons were way too strong for me, which meant I had to grind the procedurally generated slop until I was around level 10. And even then the main quest isn't even that interesting. It still has the player do the same exact errand boy / mercenary work, except now with persistent characters and locations. The whole thing is just simple political intrigues between different nobles, and it feels like the player character barely even matters. Also, the main quest aside, most of the content in Daggerfall is level scaled. With the size of the game, I hardly see a way not to make the procedurally generated quests and dungeons level scaled, but it takes away from the excitement of exploration. You will mostly encounter enemies that should be around your level and only get level appropriate gear, so there's no joy of finding a rare overpowered piece of gear and getting a spike in power, or you don't really feel getting stronger by being able to defeat enemies that were too menacing before, because you wouldn't really encounter anything outside your level. A slight detour, but since I mentioned powerful gear, you can at least get magic items in Daggerfall, but they're not that great. First of all, I just found the enchantments confusing. For example, I will get a Ruby of Lightning. What does the lightning enchantment do? No clue. The game does not elaborate whatsoever. And to top it off, the magic items have durability and are not repairable, so even if you get something decent, you don't really get to keep it for good. And also gold. I found gold nearly useless in this game, because there's barely anything worth buying. And since it has carry weight, at a certain point I just stopped looting gold, because in dungeons it would be more trouble than it's worth. It might sound awful, but with all the procedural generation, Daggerfall to me feels like a taste of what an AI-generated game could be. Endless, but absolutely meaningless content. Some dungeons in Might and Magic or Wizardry could feel like a slog, but I would take these handcrafted and properly thought out maps with purpose any day. The phrase, wide as an ocean, deep as a puddle, comes to mind when thinking of Daggerfall, but I wouldn't say it's quite accurate, because there's still depth and good ideas. It does have some very interesting ideas and mechanics, but they're just not elaborated upon enough. If I had to choose a single word to describe Daggerfall, I would choose potential. It has such interesting character building, but is sort of wasted if all the content in the game is meaningless and monotonous. There is this entire huge world to explore, but there isn't really any reason to visit any regions that are not tied to the main quest. Maybe to curb that, and the level scaling issues, the main plot could have led the player along the regions, which would gradually get harder instead of all being the same, and then the player would have the choice to skip ahead for some extra challenge and better loot, things like that. I feel like if I was around when Daggerfall first came out, or if it came out today, I would be very excited for its sequel. I would want the character building to become more meaningful. I would like to see the dungeons being more unique. I would like the main quest to be more involved, and overall more elaborate quest lines instead of menial errands. I would basically want all the same, but improved. This sort of potential also makes me curious in seeing just how much can the game be changed with mods. Can the mods actually fix the issues I have and overhaul the whole game? I feel like with enough effort, maybe. The main quest is probably set in stone, but there could still be a lot of improvements to content variety and the role-playing aspect. But hey, you're free to check that out for yourself. Literally. You can get the base game of Daggerfall for free on Steam and install the Unity version on top of it and start going at it. That's a pretty good compromise for all the jank if you ask me. That's gonna be it for this video. I hope you liked it. Leave a like if you did. You can support this channel financially on my Ko-fi page. The link is down in the description. Thank you for watching and see you in another video.